Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into the heart of something vast, ancient, and still not entirely understood, the Amazon River and the hidden mysteries beneath it. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now, feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into the Amazon together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. Imagine this, a wide band of water gliding through green shadows. Mist hangs low over the surface like breath on a mirror. Somewhere in the distance a bird calls, a sound that's both familiar and unknowably strange. The forest on either side of the water doesn't merely grow, it reaches. It leans inward, as if drawn to the river's whisper, crowding around like it wants to listen. This is the Amazon, but not the one that lives in satellite photos or tourism brochures. This is the river at night, a living ribbon of history, mystery, and memory. The largest river on Earth, not just by size, but by story, by the weight of what it hides and what it still refuses to explain. You may have heard it called the lungs of the planet, or the cradle of biodiversity, or simply the rainforest. All of these are true, in ways. But the Amazon is also a question shaped like a river. It asks, what lies beneath? What has this water seen? And why does it feel so old? Because it is. The Amazon River and the basin it drains are not just old in a human sense, they are geologically ancient. The land was once part of the supercontinent Gondwana, and the river, believe it or not, once flowed the other way, westward, not east. It coursed toward the Pacific before the slow rise of the Andes Mountains reversed its path entirely. We'll talk more about that shift later. For now, just imagine it, a river the size of a sea, turning back on itself over millions of years, recarving the map in silence. But before we dive into timelines and tectonics, let's pause here, right at the edge of this imagined river. Let's breathe with it. Because the Amazon doesn't move like other rivers. It surges and recedes with the rhythm of the sky. In the rainy season, it expands so wide that it swallows forests whole. Trees become submerged up to their branches. Fish swim between trunks. And when the waters recede months later, the forest emerges again, changed, but alive. It's as though the river exhales, then inhales, over and over in a slow seasonal breath. Even the sounds change. During the flood season, the jungle goes quieter. Birdsong echoes differently through the wet canopy. Frogs call from higher ground, and beneath the surface where roots dangle like tendrils into shadowy currents, an entire aquatic world thrives. Catfish, eels, armoured fish with scales like bone. Creatures that have adapted not just to the water, but to the water's moods. If you were to float quietly along this river at dawn, you might notice that everything seems blurred, not just the landscape softened by mist, but time itself. The Amazon doesn't give you a sense of hours or minutes. It gives you eras, layers. The present feels thin here, stretched across something much older. And yet, for all its wildness, the Amazon is not untouched. People have lived along these banks for thousands of years. Not a few wandering groups, but entire civilizations. Some still living. Some vanished into the foliage, leaving behind only strange patterns in the soil and mysterious mounds shaped like stars. For a long time, we assumed the forest had always been untouched wilderness. But slowly, and with the help of quiet technologies like LIDAR, we're beginning to see the truth beneath the trees. And then there's what lies even deeper, below the riverbed itself. Imagine a second Amazon flowing in darkness, 4 kilometers below your feet. A massive underground river called the Hamza. Discovered only recently, it runs parallel to the Amazon, wide but impossibly slow. It's not a myth. It's real. We've measured it. And yet no one has ever seen it with their own eyes. There is something comforting in that, don't you think? That in this world of data and high-resolution maps, there are still places that remain elusive. Places that keep their secrets. That's what we'll be exploring together tonight. The visible and the invisible, the river you can point to on a globe and the stories that exist just beneath the surface. We'll meet lost snakes the length of buses, cities buried in green shadows, and creatures so strange they feel like myths whispered by the trees. We'll walk roads no longer seen, dive into rivers no one has ever swum, and drift through time as softly as the current itself. But don't worry, we won't rush. There's no need to. The river never does. There are rivers, and then there is the Amazon. You may have crossed rivers before, on footbridges, stone arches, or long steel spans suspended over the water, but the Amazon is different. No footbridge rises above it, no highway arcs across. In fact, there are no bridges at all across the main stretch of this river, not a single one across thousands of kilometers. This isn't because engineers never tried, it's because the river does not invite it. The Amazon is not something you cross, it's something you enter, something you respect, and often something you circumnavigate entirely. At its narrowest points, the Amazon can seem manageable, but during the rainy season it can stretch to 24 miles wide, not just at the delta, but far inland. That's wider than some entire cities, and it's not just a question of width. The Amazon moves with immense volume and strength. At its peak flow, it releases over 200,000 cubic meters of water per second into the Atlantic Ocean. That's more than the next 7 largest rivers in the world, combined. And yet, despite its titanic power, it doesn't roar. It flows with a deep, constant push, like the breath of the earth. The river does not seek drama. It carries entire forests in its current, branches, tree trunks, seeds, and the memory of mountains eroded grain by grain. Its floodplains expand with seasonal rhythm, transforming landscapes into inland seas and then retreating quietly, leaving behind rich soil and temporary lakes teeming with life. The Amazon doesn't run in a single neat channel like a river on a map. It sprawls. It braids itself into dozens, sometimes hundreds of waterways. It floods, splits, reunites. It creates floating meadows, swamps that seem like land until you step through the foliage and vanish into waist-deep water. It carves out oxbow lakes, twisting back on itself until a curve gets cut off and becomes still water forever, like a sentence left unfinished. Because of this shifting, expansive behaviour, traditional bridge building becomes a problem not just of distance, but of definition. Where would the bridge begin? Where would it end? How do you build over something that moves its own banks every year? That breathes in floods and exhales forests? To cross the Amazon, people don't rely on bridges. They rely on boats, canoes, motorised ferries, hand-paddled rafts. Some communities float entire houses on the river, tethered like dreamlike islands. Children learn to row before they can spell their names. Markets and medicine, school and ceremony all come by water. The river is not a barrier to them. It is a road, a pantry, a neighbour, and a god. It might be tempting to think of the lack of bridges as a failure of development, but to those who live along its banks, it's not a failure. It's a choice, sometimes cultural, sometimes logistical, always practical. Building a bridge over the Amazon wouldn't just require enormous technical effort. It would also disrupt ecosystems, endanger riverbanks, and displace communities. In many ways, the absence of bridges is an acknowledgement of the river's autonomy. A quiet agreement. You do not tame what was never meant to be domesticated. Even from above, the Amazon does not yield its shape easily. Satellite images show a patchwork of water and green, of light bouncing off hundreds of tributaries and shadow pooling where the forest leans in thickest. From this height, the river looks almost shy, its strength masked by the calm curves of its surface. But below that surface, the currents are fierce. They change with the season, and with them, the entire geography of the region shifts. During the dry season, some tributaries shrink to thin threads winding through cracked mud. During the wet season, they swell and merge, turning into vast moving lakes that can submerge entire forests, only to release them again months later. It's this annual pulse, this liquid heartbeat, that defines the Amazon more than any fixed line on a map. And there's more to it than water. The Amazon's flow patterns affect the global climate. Moisture from the river basin feeds massive convective systems that drive wind and rainfall patterns as far away as North America and West Africa. It's said that a single tree in the Amazon can release up to 1,000 litres of water into the air each day through a process called transpiration. Multiply that by 1 trillion trees, and you begin to see why the sky above the rainforest is almost always whispering rain, why clouds seem to drift here with a kind of reverence. So here we are, at the edge of something that defies boundaries, a river that refuses to be crossed in the usual way, a force so vast, so constant, and so subtly powerful that it shapes not only the land it touches, but the air we breathe, the food we grow, and the weather we live under. The Amazon is not just a river, it is a continent of water, moving without hurry, bearing the weight of 1 million unseen histories. As we continue our journey, keep that in mind. This is not a place that can be charted once and for all. It's not a single story. It is thousands of stories flowing side by side, interweaving, parting, returning. And as we follow its surface tonight, we'll see that the water is only the beginning. When we imagine the Amazon, we often picture green, an overwhelming green, deep and alive and endless. But if you listen closely, that green sings. It chirps, buzzes, rustles, clicks, and occasionally growls. In the Amazon, silence is rare. Every square metre hums with life, and many of the creatures that live here have no intention of staying quiet. The Amazon is the most biodiverse place on Earth. More species are found here than anywhere else. 1 in 10 known species calls this basin home, and for every animal we've discovered, scientists suspect there are dozens more we've yet to find, still camouflaged in the understory or gliding unseen beneath the water. The forest is not a zoo. It's a breathing archive of evolutionary experiments, each more intricate than the last. Let's begin near the riverbank, where the waters lap softly against twisted roots and floating leaves. Beneath that dark surface swims a fish with a sharp reputation, the piranha. Often misunderstood, piranhas are not the frenzied monsters of horror films. Most of the time they feed on smaller fish, crustaceans and fruit that falls into the water. But during times of low water or scarcity they can become aggressive. They are cautious, fast and equipped with teeth so sharp that local people have been known to use their jawbones as tools. A bite from a red-bellied piranha is clean, almost surgical. It's not the bite itself that terrifies. It's the idea of many striking at once, vanishing just as quickly as they appeared. Further beneath the water, where the light dims and currents deepen, swims the electric eel. Not truly an eel, but a type of knife fish. It glides silently, sinuous and deliberate until it decides to speak, and when it speaks, it does so with electricity. Using specialised organs, it can release shocks of up to 600 volts, enough to stun fish, deter predators, and even cause humans to lose consciousness if contact is prolonged. The electric eel doesn't shout. It hums in voltage. If we drift from the riverbank into the forest, we find ourselves in a world where the ground is soft with decay and the air thick with scent. This is the realm of the bullet ant, named not for its size, though it is large, but for its sting, which is said to be as painful as a gunshot. Indigenous initiation rituals in some Amazonian tribes involve placing a glove woven with these ants onto the hand, a test of endurance and control. The pain, they say, is momentary, but the memory lingers. Nearby, hidden among the bark and leaves, waits the Brazilian wandering spider, regarded by some researchers as the most venomous spider on the planet. It does not build webs, it does not hide in corners, it wanders, hunting. Its venom can cause intense pain, muscle paralysis, and in rare cases death. Yet it too is not the villain of the forest. It is merely one of many highly specialized creatures adapted to a world where nothing is wasted and everything is connected. The forest canopy above is alive with brighter drama. Macaws scream their colours through the air, and howler monkeys voice their presence with calls that can travel for 3 miles through thick vegetation. The sound is low and resonant, like wind being pulled through a hollow tree, and it rises at dawn like a living alarm clock. To hear it is to remember that the forest does not sleep all at once. It stirs in shifts, each creature waking and resting according to its own rhythms. And then there are the anacondas, the heavy-bodied serpents that haunt swampy waters and muddy lagoons. Green anacondas, the largest of the species, can reach lengths of over 25 feet and weigh as much as a small motorcycle. They do not move quickly, but they do not need to. They wrap, they wait, and when they strike, it is silent. Despite their size, anacondas are not indiscriminate hunters. They feed infrequently, taking down capybaras, caimans, or wild pigs, then disappearing into stillness for weeks. Not far from them at night you might glimpse a shimmer of eyes watching from a tree limb. The jaguar, solitary and elusive, is the apex predator of this biome. It does not roar, it mutters, chuffs, and sometimes remains completely silent. When it hunts, it does not chase, it stalks. With jaws powerful enough to pierce the skull of its prey, the jaguar is revered not only for its strength, but for its stealth. Indigenous myths often treat the jaguar as both a physical and spiritual being, half beast, half shadow. And above it all, in the dark corners of the canopy, flutter the vampire bats, small and delicate, but with a feeding strategy that startles the imagination. These creatures do not drain large amounts of blood. They make a small incision, often while the animal sleeps, and lap gently. Their saliva contains an anticoagulant that prevents the wound from clotting. The bite is rarely felt. The next morning the only sign may be a drop of blood and a question in the wind. All of these creatures, from the smallest insect to the great anaconda, belong to a web that is both ancient and fluid. The Amazon does not categorize its residents as beautiful or terrifying. It simply houses them, and in truth, there is something beautiful in the terrifying, and something slightly unnerving in the truly beautiful. Orchids that bloom only once a year in a hidden crook of a tree. Frogs the size of a thumbnail whose poison can stop a human heart. A beetle that clicks like a clock and can launch itself several inches into the air, each of them strange, each of them perfectly suited to the life the forest provides. So when we speak of the Amazon's biodiversity, we aren't just listing names in a book. We're describing a kind of living puzzle, where each piece has evolved alongside the others, shaped not just by survival, but by coexistence. The piranha needs the floodplain, the monkey needs the fig, the jaguar needs the silence. In this way, the Amazon is more than a habitat. It is a relationship between water and land, predator and prey, night and day. It is not meant to be tamed or simplified. It is meant to be observed, carefully, patiently, and always with a touch of wonder. The Amazon rainforest is often called the lungs of the planet, and while that phrase may be more poetic than literal, it captures something essential about this place, something gentle, rhythmic, and vital. When you stand beneath its canopy, or even just imagine yourself there, the air feels different. Not just wetter or warmer, though it is both, but fuller. As if you're breathing in something older than oxygen, something laced with memory. This forest does not sit still. It breathes in every sense. It exhales water vapour through leaves in a process called transpiration, sending up invisible clouds that help form rain hundreds of miles away. One tree might release hundreds of litres of moisture into the air each day. Multiply that by trillions, and you begin to understand why the Amazon makes its own weather. The forest creates clouds not just for itself, but for the continent. It draws ocean air inland and sends rivers of vapour flowing overhead, quiet and unseen, carrying rainfall to mountains, farmlands and distant cities. And it doesn't just breathe, it glows. Tucked among the leaves and shadows, there are pockets of light that don't come from the sun. They belong to life itself. Bioluminescent fungi curl on damp wood like silent embers, glowing a soft green in the night. Some insects carry lights in their bellies, blinking tiny signals to attract mates or warn predators. Fireflies, of course, but also more elusive creatures. Beetles whose lights move in patterns like constellations, hidden beneath the canopy instead of above it. To walk through the forest at night, if you dared and could keep your flashlight off, would be to see stars moving at your feet. And yet, not all the forest's strange beauty comes in flashes. Much of it grows slowly, stretching toward the sun in patient spirals, or sliding roots down from the branches like dangling fingers. Some of the trees walk, at least in a way. Certain species, like the Socratia exoriza, sometimes called the walking palm, can grow new roots in one direction while letting older ones die off, allowing them to slowly shift their position over time. It's not a stroll exactly, but it's motion, an almost imperceptible lean toward better light, away from shade or fallen neighbours. A quiet vote for survival, cast in inches. In other parts of the forest, orchids grow not in soil, but in the air. They attach to branches and draw moisture from fog, dew and humid air. Some of them bloom only once every few years, opening delicate petals that last for just a few days or even hours. Their entire strategy relies on timing, on catching the right breeze, the right insect, the right window of sun. To see one in full bloom is a kind of gift, and one that often comes only with stillness and patience. Everywhere you look, things are cooperating, albeit quietly. Ants farm fungus in underground nests. Birds follow monkey troops, waiting for insects to be flushed from hiding. Frogs hide in bromeliads, using the tiny pools of rainwater in each plant's curled leaves as nurseries for their young. Even the trees themselves communicate in a sense. Scientists believe the Amazon's root systems and fungal networks allow for nutrient sharing and even chemical warnings. A tree under attack by pests might release compounds into the soil that signal its neighbours, helping them prepare their own defences. It's not conversation exactly, but it is connection. And then there's the light, not the kind made by creatures, but the sunlight that filters through the leaves above. It arrives fragmented, scattered, diffused into greens and golds. The canopy absorbs most of it, but some slips through in beams, falling onto the forest floor like spilled honey. For the plants and animals that live below, this is treasure. A single shaft of light can mean the difference between blooming and fading, between growing tall or staying stunted. This dappled sunlight is part of why the forest feels the way it does. It's never fully dark, nor fully bright. Instead, it's layered, dim here, luminous there, shifting as leaves move with the wind. This slow, flickering light becomes part of the atmosphere. It softens edges, it quiets movement. It makes even the loudest colours, scarlet macaws, blue butterflies, seem like flickers in a dream, vivid but fleeting. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Amazon's surface life is how intertwined it all is. This is not a forest of individuals, it is a collective, a web so dense and interconnected that removing one strand causes ripples throughout the rest. When one tree falls, it opens a gap in the canopy that changes light patterns, temperature, humidity, and the behaviour of dozens of nearby species. That single absence becomes a new beginning. For vines, for mushrooms, for saplings waiting their turn. It's easy to think of the rainforest as chaotic. The noise, the colour, the seeming randomness of it all. But if you listen longer, you begin to hear the rhythm, the pulse of a system that has evolved not just to survive, but to sustain itself. Nothing grows too fast. Nothing dominates for long. Even the tallest trees eventually fall and become soil, feeding the next generation. Even the most delicate flowers adapt their bloom to the weather, the moon, the hum of pollinators. So as we pause at the end of this surface-level exploration, take a breath with the forest. Let your thoughts drift upward through the canopy, following the curve of a vine or the spiral of a floating seed. Everything you've seen, the glowing fungi, the whispering roots, the frogs cradled in flower cups, is only what's visible. Only what rises above the soil and catches the light. There is more, much more, hidden below. And that is where we'll go next. Far beneath the surface of the Amazon, below the drifting leaves and hidden anacondas, below the flooded roots and murky sediment, lies another river. It does not shimmer in the sunlight. It does not flood villages or feed dolphins or glisten under moonlight. In fact, it was invisible to us for most of history. Not because it was too small to see, but because it was buried too deep to know it was there at all. This river, called the Hamza, flows nearly 4 kilometres below the Amazon, hidden in layers of ancient rock. It was discovered only recently, in 2011, by a team of geophysical researchers led by Valia Hamza, whose name the river now quietly bears. The discovery wasn't made with boats or binoculars. It came from analysing borehole pressure data collected from deep oil exploration wells across the Amazon basin. The team noticed something strange. Patterns in the pressure that suggested lateral movement of water, slow and wide, flowing not upward or downward, but sideways, like a hidden whisper echoing beneath the roar of the Amazon above. And what they found was astonishing. The Hamza is estimated to be over 6,000 kilometres long, running parallel to the surface river from the Andes to the Atlantic Ocean. But while the Amazon churns with immense speed and volume, the Hamza moves with a lethargic grace, drifting at a speed of less than 1 millimetre per second. It is vastly wider than its sibling, up to 400 kilometres across in some regions. But its flow is so slow, so patient, that calling it a river almost feels metaphorical. And yet, it flows, quietly, constantly, without ever being seen. This underground river likely does not run in an open tunnel of water, like some secret cavern stream. Instead, it seeps and pulses through porous rock, a diffuse but unified flow shaped by ancient geological faults and the immense weight of history. It belongs to a class of features known as aquifers, though its scale and orientation make it feel more like a buried ocean. A shadow of the river we know, older, slower, and far more secretive. There's something deeply comforting about the idea of the Hamza, that there can be two rivers, one bold and visible, one buried and still, flowing side by side, shaping the same land in completely different ways. The Amazon above shapes ecosystems, cities, cultures. The Hamza below shapes pressure, minerals, and subterranean flows we barely understand. One feeds forests, the other may feed silence, and yet they are connected. Not directly, perhaps, not in the way two streams might merge, but in their shared origin and direction. Both flow eastward toward the Atlantic. Both begin in the highlands of Peru and Colombia and end in the same ocean. their waters parted by rock and gravity, but bound by geology and time. Together they create something extraordinary, a dual drainage system, layered across kilometres of vertical distance, each one unaware of the other's full story. One moves in light, the other in shadow. It's humbling to know that such a massive river existed beneath our feet all along, unknown to science until a little more than a decade ago. It reminds us that Earth is still full of mysteries, not just in faraway galaxies or microscopic particles, but right here, under the soles of our boots. The Hamza was not discovered because someone stumbled upon it. It was revealed because we finally learned how to listen in the right way, with the right instruments, in the right places. The Hamza also raises new questions. How old is it truly? How was it formed? What ancient tectonic shifts opened up the paths it now follows? And perhaps most intriguingly, what lives in or near it? While it's unlikely that fish or amphibians swim through its pressurized flow, we know that deep aquifers can host microbial life, adapted to darkness, heat, and isolation. Life that exists without photosynthesis, feeding instead on minerals and chemical reactions. If such organisms live in the Hamza, they may represent entirely unique ecosystems, closed off from the surface world for millions of years. In that sense, the Hamza is not just a river, it is a memory, flowing through stone, a record of past climates, past pressures, past rivers now gone. It may contain the trace of ancient rain that fell before humans walked these lands. Rain that seeped slowly through soil, trickled down through fractured rock, and joined the quiet stream below. It's as though the earth, like any good storyteller, decided to keep a private version of the tale, one written in pressure instead of words. We often think of exploration as something outward, going farther, higher, beyond the known map. But discoveries like the Hamza remind us that sometimes the greatest unknowns are not ahead of us, but beneath us. We have flown drones over Mars and landed probes on comets, but we are still learning how to read the silent script of our own planet's depths. And now that we know it exists, the Hamza won't be forgotten. Scientists continue to study its flow, its structure, and its role in the hydrology of the Amazon basin. And though we may never see it with our own eyes, it has quietly joined the map. Not as a blue line, but as a reminder that for every river that runs in daylight there may be another, moving quietly below, carrying stories we haven't yet learned how to tell. So next time you picture the Amazon, imagine this. Not one river, but two. One loud, one nearly still, one feeding the trees, the animals, the life that dances in sunlight, the other feeding pressure, stone, and maybe, somewhere in the dark, something that breathes without ever seeing the sky. We often think of rivers as permanent, as fixtures in the landscape. A river, once it chooses a path, seems to follow it forever. But the Amazon has never been one to follow the rules of permanence. Its current path, the eastward journey from the Andes to the Atlantic, feels natural now, inevitable even. The rain falls in the mountains, the water gathers in streams, and the great river carries it across a continent. That's how it's always been, we might assume. But that's not true. Once, long ago, the Amazon flowed the other way. To understand how this reversal happened, we must look not only at rivers, but at continents, at the enormous crawling forces that shape the surface of the Earth over millions of years. Around 100 million years ago, during the time of the dinosaurs, South America and Africa were still slowly drifting apart, remnants of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana. Back then, the terrain of northern South America was relatively flat, sloping gently westward, toward what would one day become the Pacific Ocean, and because the land sloped west, so did the rivers. Instead of flowing east into the Atlantic like today, ancient rivers in the heart of the continent carried water in the opposite direction. The Amazon was part of a massive transcontinental drainage system that moved across lowland plains, possibly even connecting to the Proto-Congo River system before the Atlantic widened and separated the continents for good. But something monumental was beginning to happen at the continent's western edge. The Andes Mountains, today a towering spine of peaks stretching from Venezuela to Chile, had not yet risen to their full height. Over the next 80 million years, driven by the collision of tectonic plates, the Nazca Plate pushing beneath the South American plate, the land began to buckle and lift. What was once a gentle slope became a growing barrier. The flow of rivers slowed, sediments backed up, trapped behind the rising mountains, and slowly, over time, the balance tipped. Eventually, the mountains grew so high, and the build-up of sediment became so vast that the direction of flow across the continent was reversed. Water that had once moved west now began to push east, carving new paths, joining with other streams, and forming the earliest version of the Amazon River we recognise today. It was not a sudden change. It was a reweaving of the landscape, happening over millions of years, a quiet reshaping that turned the continent inside out. This reversal transformed not only the direction of the river, but the environment around it. For a long period, the central basin of the Amazon was a kind of vast, swampy inland sea, cut off from both oceans, trapped between the rising Andes and the still developing lowlands to the east. In these wetlands, life thrived. Giant turtles, crocodilian ancestors, and eventually the massive Titanoboa all lived and died in these shifting waters, which were rich with nutrients and warmed by a humid greenhouse climate. Eventually the land to the east continued to sink and erode, while the river carved its way toward the Atlantic, breaking free from its stagnant basin and becoming the dynamic, sprawling system we see today. In doing so, it carried with it millions of years of sediments, fossils, and biological matter, layer upon layer of geological memory, now buried beneath the modern riverbed. To imagine the Amazon flowing in reverse is to feel time moving in ways we rarely consider. We're used to thinking of rivers as metaphors for time, always moving forward, never backward. But the Amazon defies even that. It is a river that remembers when its own direction was different, when its path was carved not by will or weather, but by the slow, grinding tectonics of the earth itself, and what remains of that earlier time, not just in sediment, but in structure. Much of the modern Amazon's complexity, its braided channels, its floodplains, its oxbow lakes, are shaped by this long history. The river didn't simply start over when it changed course. It adapted. It carried the shape of its past into its new direction. The ancient westward flow left traces that still influence where the water runs today, where it pools, where it shifts. The river is not just a stream of water, it is a map of pressure and resistance, of memory embedded in land. It also helps explain why the Amazon basin is such a haven for biodiversity. The shifting landscapes, the periodic flooding, the varied soils, all of it creates countless niches, environments within environments. What we now see as one vast forest is in fact a patchwork of ancient lake beds, buried river channels and uplifted plains, each with its own story and ecosystem. We rarely think about the shape of the earth beneath our feet. Most of the time the ground feels still, permanent. But the Amazon tells a different story, one where continents drift, mountains rise, and rivers change their minds over the course of epochs. In that story, even the most powerful river is not fixed but fluid in both time and space. And perhaps, as we float on the modern Amazon, watching the water slide past the hull of a canoe or ripple against the roots of a submerged tree, we can begin to feel that deep past pressing upward from below. The river's path today may seem final, but somewhere, in the layering of sediments and the pressure of the current, the memory of its reversal still lingers, quiet, unhurried, waiting to be read like a palimpsest beneath the pages of the present. The Amazon, after all, is not just a river. It is a direction that changed, a past that refused to stay buried, a lesson in how even the mightiest forces can, with time, bend and turn and flow the other way. There's a certain stillness to fossils, a kind of silence that feels deeper than the absence of sound. They do not speak, they do not move, and yet they carry echoes, not just of creatures long gone, but of entire worlds that once were. In the warm, heavy swamps that blanketed ancient South America, long before the Amazon River had found its final direction, a different caste of life ruled the wetlands. Some of these animals defy imagination, not because they are unknown, but because they feel too large, too mythic, too unreal to have ever existed on Earth. Among them was the Titanoboa. The name, already heavy with implication, gives a hint at what it once was. Titan for its size, boa for its kind. Discovered in the fossil-rich Karajon Formation in northeastern Colombia, where open-pit coal mines have peeled back layers of rock and time, Titanoboa is the largest snake ever known to science. It lived roughly 60 million years ago in the Paleocene epoch, during a time when the Amazon basin was not a forest, but a vast tropical swamp, a place of warmth, wetness, and extraordinary growth. Estimates suggest Titanoboa stretched between 13 and 15 metres long, perhaps more. That's about the length of a school bus, only thicker, heavier, and wrapped in muscle. It weighed over a ton, making it not just long but incredibly powerful. It would not have slithered across dry land like a garden snake. It moved more likely through water, gliding silently beneath the surface, using buoyancy to support its massive frame. In many ways, it behaved more like a crocodile than a modern boa. Patient, ambush-driven, deadly. But here's where it becomes even more surprising. Titanoboa, for all its size and strength, likely did not hunt dinosaurs as popular imagination might wish. Instead, it ate fish. Big ones, yes. Armoured prehistoric species, thick-scaled and slow-moving. But fish all the same. Its jaws, flexible like those of modern snakes, could open wide enough to swallow them whole. And it hunted in the warmth of a world recovering from catastrophe, the aftermath of the asteroid impact that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Titanoboa was not a relic of the past, but a pioneer of the new, filling ecological niches that had been emptied by extinction. In some poetic sense, it was the first giant of the New World. But Titanoboa was not alone in these waters. The same layers of sediment that preserved its vertebrae also tell of other monsters, like Purosaurus, a genus of ancient crocodilians that may have reached lengths of 12 metres, far larger than today's largest crocodiles. Their skulls alone were over 5 feet long, and their bite force would have been among the strongest in the history of life. Alongside them were giant turtles, carapaces the size of truck tyres, and strange, bony fish that looked like something drawn from a fever dream. It was a time of scale, of strength, of ecological overcorrection. Life had space, warmth, and oxygen. So it grew. The ecosystem that hosted these giants was very different from the modern Amazon. The forest we now imagine, a thick canopy, dappled light, tangled vines, had not yet evolved. Instead, the land was dominated by swampy lowlands and freshwater lakes, framed by early versions of the Andes, which were still rising in the west. The air was hotter, the seasons less pronounced. CO2 levels were higher, and global temperatures remained elevated from the planet's post-extinction climate reset. In this environment, reptiles thrived. Cold-blooded animals benefit greatly from heat. Their metabolic processes become more efficient, their energy more easily maintained, and so Titanoboa grew. It grew because the Earth allowed it to, because nothing had yet arrived to stop it. Today, its fossils rest in stone. Carefully reconstructed, they give us a glimpse of its spine, its shape, its astonishing scale. In museums, a full replica coils above visitors like a memory made solid. But in the wild, in the land it once ruled, There are no snakes like it. The Amazon, dense and humid though it is, no longer supports such giants. The temperatures have cooled, the balance of life has shifted, and the creatures that now live here have found their niches at smaller scales. Still, the legacy of Titanoboa lingers. It reminds us that the Amazon basin, so often imagined as static and eternal, is in fact layered with eras. That beneath the roots and rivers lies a different kind of jungle, one made of stone and sediment, of heat and time. The creatures buried there were not fantasy. They were answers to the conditions of their time. And now they are questions for ours. Why did they vanish? Was it only the climate that changed? Did competition from mammals, those scrappy newcomers, edge them out? Or was it a combination of pressures, cooling air, shrinking prey, evolving ecosystems? We don't know for certain, but we know they were here, and we know they were enormous. In many ways, learning about Titanoboa is less about the snake itself, and more about what kind of world could have grown such a being. What kind of warmth, what kind of water, what kind of silence. The Amazon has worn many faces, and the one we see today is only the latest. Beneath its living roots lie the bones of giants, forgotten not by the forest but by time, still held, still cradled in the folds of earth, and if you listen softly to the stillness of the swamps, to the hush of rain falling on wide leaves, you might imagine the ripple of something large just below the surface. Not real, not anymore, but remembered. For centuries, the prevailing view of the Amazon rainforest was one of untouched wilderness, vast, impenetrable and unshaped by human hands. A place too wild for civilization, too dense for cities, too unyielding for roads. Early explorers described it as hostile to agriculture and hostile to permanence. And so, for a long time, the idea that organised human societies might once have flourished beneath its canopy seemed unlikely, even absurd. But then came the light, not metaphorical insight, but literal beams, bounced from satellites and small aircraft, designed to scan the ground with precision, even through a ceiling of leaves. This is LiDAR, light detection and ranging, a technology that uses pulses of laser light to create high-resolution maps of the Earth's surface. It doesn't see like the human eye does. It doesn't stop at the first leaf or branch. Instead, it fires millions of beams toward the ground and measures the time it takes for them to return. Some hit treetops, some strike vines, but a few, enough, make it all the way to the forest floor, mapping the terrain hidden beneath the foliage. And when the data is collected and processed, the results are nothing short of astonishing. In the past 2 decades, researchers flying over parts of the Bolivian and Brazilian Amazon began to see patterns, regular, geometric, and unmistakably artificial. These weren't random bumps in the terrain. They were grids, plazas, mounds, and roadways. In particular, in the Llanos de Mojos region of Bolivia, the scanning revealed the ghostly outline of a civilization now called the Casarabe culture, which flourished between 500 and 1400 AD. Hidden for centuries beneath thick jungle growth were the traces of planned urban centres. Not small, isolated villages, but large, interconnected settlements with causeways, canals, and earthworks. In one area alone, researchers found more than 20 individual sites, some with platforms, conical mounds, and moated enclosures. These weren't haphazard or makeshift. They were deliberate, aligned, thoughtful. Some of the platforms stretch over 300 metres across, and the straight roads connecting them run arrow-like through the forest, ignoring hills and rivers. These are processional roads, wide enough for groups to walk side by side and remarkably straight. The cities they linked suggest a high level of coordination and planning, a kind of Amazonian urbanism that is only now coming into focus. It's worth pausing to reflect on just how remarkable this discovery is. Not because we've found ancient cities, humanity has built many, but because of where they were found and how. For generations, archaeologists walked past these sites without realising what lay beneath their feet. The dense vegetation covered everything. A mound here might have looked like a natural rise in the land. A shallow ditch could have been mistaken for erosion. Without the ability to clear-cut vast sections of forest, which would have been both environmentally and ethically troubling, there was simply no way to see the whole picture. Until light began to do what hands could not. LIDAR has allowed scientists to scan thousands of hectares in a matter of hours, revealing hidden landscapes that would have taken decades to uncover using traditional excavation. And it has rewritten our assumptions. The Amazon, far from being untouched, now appears to have been actively shaped by the people who lived there. People who did not just adapt to the rainforest, but collaborated with it. The Kasarabi culture is not the only example. In other regions, like the Xingu in Brazil, archaeologists have uncovered similar patterns, clusters of settlements linked by wide roads, arranged around central plazas, often near rivers and artificial fish ponds. These weren't random, isolated outposts. They were networks, systems of settlement, living maps of social and ecological intelligence. But perhaps what is most moving about these revelations is not the grandeur of the architecture, but the way it was made. The mounds and platforms weren't built from stone, but from earth, carefully shaped, layered, and maintained. They rose not from conquest, but from collaboration. They used what the land provided without carving it into something alien. This wasn't a civilization that sought to dominate the forest. It worked with it, around it, beneath it. And when these cities were eventually abandoned, the forest did what it always does. It grew back. It softened the edges of the plazas, covered the roads in vines, turned the mounds into gentle hills, but it did not destroy them. It simply held them in place, like a book closed but not forgotten, waiting for someone to come along with the right kind of light to read it again. There's a kind of humility in these discoveries, a quiet reminder that just because we do not see something does not mean it is not there, that just because a place looks wild now does not mean it was always so, and that intelligence, design, and complexity are not always accompanied by ruins of stone. Sometimes they are written in soil, in symmetry, in the gentle arc of an ancient path, revealed once more by the pulse of a laser beam. The rainforest has always whispered its stories. Now, for the first time in centuries, we're beginning to hear them. Once the LIDAR images had been processed, lines sharpened, shadows peeled back, terrain re-illuminated in ways human eyes had never seen before, what emerged was not merely a collection of shapes. It was a system, a plan, a memory of movement. Stretching across forested lowlands were networks of raised roads, pyramidal mounds, and star-like geometric enclosures, each one suggesting not randomness, but design, intention, and identity. At first, these raised roads may seem simple, but when archaeologists examined their scale and layout, they began to realise just how sophisticated these builders were. The roads didn't merely connect point A to point B, they were straight, remarkably so, cutting across uneven terrain, sometimes elevated above seasonal flood zones. Some stretched for several kilometres with minimal deviation, despite running through wetlands, across gentle ridges, and over soft, unstable ground. That's not the work of chance. That's surveying, planning, and a deeply embedded sense of orientation. In many sites, roads lead directly to central plazas or large earthen mounds, spaces likely used for ceremony, trade, or governance. The plazas themselves were often circular or rectangular, cleared of trees and framed by platform mounds that offered elevation above the jungle floor. These weren't merely functional centres, they were symbolic landscapes, where space was organised in ways that spoke to social structure, cosmology, and cultural rhythm. The mounds, some shaped as elongated, Ridges, others as conical pyramids, were not simply piles of earth. They were engineered, layered with different materials, stabilised with clay and gravel, sometimes topped with structures that no longer survive but likely served as temples or elite residences. In some places, mounds were arranged in constellations, mirroring celestial forms or aligned with solstices and equinoxes. Such alignments suggest a cultural relationship not just with space, but with time, with the turning of the heavens above the canopy. And then there were the geometric enclosures, often shaped like stars. A central mound surrounded by radiating ditches or berms forming 5-point or 6-point patterns. These shapes are hard to detect on the ground, where vegetation hides edges and fills in low spots. But from above, stripped of green, the patterns are unmistakable. They seem too precise to be defensive, and too large to be merely decorative. Most scholars believe they had ritual significance, anchoring communities around shared spiritual or calendrical meanings. It's tempting to compare these structures to pyramids of stone, Egypt, Mesoamerica, Angkor, but the Amazon's builders chose a different material. Earth, shaped and compacted, was the medium of memory here. And while mud doesn't rise as high or last as long as granite, it carries something else, the imprint of hands. These were built not by slaves under kings, but likely by communal labour, tied to seasonal cycles, kinship groups and ceremonies that united work with celebration. Their survival, even in partial form, tells us something important about the societies that built them. These were not nomads drifting from place to place. They were settled peoples with a long enough horizon of time to build structures that took years to complete, and they returned to them again and again. The roads were maintained, the mounds were repaired and expanded. The plazas show signs of long use, layered with ash, charcoal, pottery shards, and fragments of daily life. And perhaps most humbling of all is the knowledge that these structures were hiding in plain sight. For centuries, travellers walked nearby without knowing. Locals might have noticed the odd rise in the ground, the peculiar curve of the land, but without the aerial view, without the light sweep of LiDAR, the full picture remained veiled. The forest had simply taken them back, not erased, but enfolded, as if it had decided to keep their stories quiet until the world was ready to hear them. These mounds and roads also complicate our sense of what a city is. They lack the stone temples and monuments that we often associate with civilization, but they had infrastructure, planning, and symbolic order. They were shaped around rivers, wetlands, and seasonal floodplains, built to work with water, not against it. Their builders understood that permanence was not about defying the forest, but about learning its tempo, rising with it, settling with it, and leaving behind a pattern that could last beyond their time. Some roads, especially the longer ones, are thought to have served as processional paths, routes for ritual movement, seasonal pilgrimage, or social gathering. Imagine a line of people walking these roads at dusk, carrying light, moving toward a central mound as drums echo faintly through the trees. The forest now is quiet, but the earth still holds the faint trace of footsteps that once knew the way. And though these cities are no longer inhabited, their foundations remain intact. Unlike stone cities, which are often reduced to rubble, the earthworks of the Amazon blend with the landscape, becoming part of the terrain's natural logic. In some cases, forest regrowth has even preserved their shape, roots binding the structures together, moisture keeping the soil dense and stable. Paradoxically, the forest that hid these cities may also be the reason we still have them. In the end, what LiDAR revealed was not just that ancient people lived in the rainforest. It showed that they thrived, that they organised space, that they built roads and ceremonial centres, that they moved through the forest with a purpose greater than survival, and that purpose left marks deep enough to outlast time, fire, and even the forgetting of history. If you were to walk through the Amazon with your eyes cast down, watching your steps over roots and leaves in the uneven softness of forest floor, you might never notice what lies beneath. But dig just a little deeper, only a few feet down in some places, and you may uncover something strange. A soil so dark it almost seems charred, but rich with life. A soil that smells sweet and holds together loosely in your hand, like coffee grounds or compost well-aged. This is terra preta, the black earth made not by accident, but by human hands, centuries or even millennia ago. Terra preta, which in Portuguese simply means dark earth, is not a natural feature of the Amazon. The native soils in this region, despite the lushness above, are usually infertile, leached of nutrients by heavy rains, and dependent on the rapid recycling of organic matter from falling leaves and decaying plants. In most parts of the rainforest, remove the canopy and the soil turns to dust within a season. That's why modern agriculture has always struggled here. Without the forest, the land doesn't last. But terra preta is different. This soil lasts. In fact, it seems to get better with time. It is richer, darker, and more productive than surrounding soils, capable of supporting multiple harvests without added fertilizer. And the most remarkable part is this: it is not a quirk of geology or a gift from nature. It is a product of culture, created by the people who once lived in the forest and knew how to tend it not just above, but from within the ground. Scientists studying terra preta have found a consistent pattern. These soils are full of charcoal, made by slow-burning organic matter in low oxygen conditions, a process known as pyrolysis. But they also contain bone fragments, broken pottery, manure, and composted food scraps. Together, these elements create a matrix that retains moisture, traps nutrients, and fosters beneficial microbial life. In effect, it's a prehistoric soil technology, one that modern agronomists are still trying to fully understand, let alone replicate. What this means is that the people who lived in the pre-Columbian Amazon weren't simply extracting from the forest. They were building it from below. They transformed poor, sandy soils into fertile ground, not in isolated garden plots, but across wide areas, sometimes dozens of hectares in size. And the black earth they created is still there, still nourishing plants, still visible in satellite imagery, and still cultivated today by local farmers who know it's worth more than gold. Some terra preta sites are associated with known settlements, suggesting intentional urban soil management. Others appear in remote areas where no large structures have yet been discovered, raising the possibility of forgotten villages or mobile horticultural communities whose imprint remains only in the earth. Either way, the presence of terra preta challenges the notion that the Amazon was an untouched Eden. Instead, it was a garden, wild in appearance, but shaped over time with care, patience, and sophisticated ecological knowledge. There is something deeply beautiful about the idea of soil as memory. In most histories, we look for stone, temples, monuments, towers. But here, the legacy is not above ground. It is beneath your feet. It's in the dirt that feeds your food, in the charcoal grains that remain after centuries of rain, in the bone shards that hint at community meals and ancestral feasts. Each clump of terra preta is a time capsule, holding not just nutrients but stories. And this black earth is not dead. Far from it. It teems with life, microbes, fungi, insects, and roots. In recent years, scientists have found that terra preta soils support much higher biodiversity than surrounding soils, even when planted with the same crops. Some researchers have called it a kind of anthropogenic biome, an ecosystem created and sustained by human influence. It suggests a different way of thinking about land use, not as a destructive force, but as a potential partner in the creation of new life. This ancient technique also has relevance for our time. As modern agriculture faces soil degradation, climate instability, and growing demand, there is increasing interest in biochar, a modern cousin of the charcoal used in terra preta. Biochar, too, holds nutrients, retains moisture, and can even sequester carbon. And yet, even with all our technology, we're still catching up to the quiet genius of those who came before, those who made gardens not from conquest, but from understanding. The black earth of the Amazon speaks in whispers, doesn't shout, it doesn't gleam, it doesn't crumble into ruins, it endures slowly below the forest, asking only that we notice. And perhaps what it tells us, more than anything, is that there are other ways to shape a world, ways that do not leave scars but layers, that do not dominate but deepen, that make the soil better, the forest stronger, the memory richer. It is easy to forget that soil is alive, that it grows and breathes and holds, but the people who made Terra Preta never forgot. They worked with fire, yes, but gently, transforming ash into foundation. They worked with waste, turning it into food. And they worked with time, knowing that good soil is not made in a season. It is cultivated over generations. And now, as the forest continues to grow above, those black soils still hold what was once a promise, that it is possible to live in a place, to love it, and to leave something behind that feeds it long after you've gone. When we speak of lost civilizations, the imagination often drifts toward the dramatic. Cities swallowed by sand, temples buried by volcanoes, entire cultures reduced to scattered ruins under jungle vines. But in the Amazon, loss unfolds differently. It comes not with fire or flood, but with quiet. With the slow return of leaves and moss and root. With time gently smoothing away the edges of memory, until even the mounds forget who stood upon them. By the 15th century, many of the complex urban societies in the Amazon, like the Caçarabe culture in Bolivia, or the builders of the geometric enclosures in Brazil, had vanished. Their roads no longer echoed with footsteps. Their plazas stood empty. Their soil remained still fertile, still dark, but the hands that once stirred it were gone, and no one knows exactly why. Theories abound. One possibility lies in the rhythm of the climate. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests that the Amazon may have experienced periods of prolonged drought during this time, disrupting water systems, crop cycles, and the careful balance these societies had built. In a place where water is both blessing and boundary, a shift in rainfall can unravel more than just agriculture. It can change trade, mobility, even social cohesion. Another theory speaks of disease, not from within, but from beyond. By the time European explorers began reaching the edges of the Amazon basin in the 16th century, waves of epidemic illness had already swept through much of the Americas. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza moved faster than ships or horses, carried along trade routes and contact networks. Even a single point of exposure could lead to population collapse on a scale unimaginable. Communities that had never seen a European face may still have felt the shadow of one in the form of fever and silence. And with the people gone, the forest began its slow, patient work of reclamation. Unlike cities of stone that defy erosion, Amazonian earthworks were built to live with the forest, and so, when they were no longer maintained, they didn't resist its return. Vines crept over platforms, roots split mounds open and softened them into hills, canals filled with leaves, then mud, then memory. In a few generations, what had once been a living, breathing city was reduced to a ripple in the terrain, indistinguishable from the rest of the green ocean. But erasure is not the same as forgetting. The forest did not destroy what was left behind. It held it, preserved it in its own way. Beneath the canopy, the stories waited, hidden, not lost, waiting for the light to shift, for the eyes to see, for the questions to be asked again. This is perhaps the most haunting part of the disappearance. Not that these societies vanished, but that for so long we didn't know they'd been there at all. Colonial narratives spoke of wilderness, of scattered tribes, of land untouched and unclaimed. The very presence of ancient complexity didn't fit those stories, so it went unrecognised. It's only now, with the advent of technologies like LiDAR and a growing willingness to listen to indigenous oral histories, that we're beginning to understand how much we've overlooked. And yet, there are still people in the Amazon, descendants of those vanished cultures, living in villages that trace the outlines of older towns, speaking languages shaped by centuries of adaptation, and tending to the forest in ways passed down through generations. The knowledge was never entirely lost, it simply shifted form, hidden in stories, in tools, in quiet traditions of land use and planting that survived even as the cities faded from view. We often imagine history as a series of progressions, rise, peak, collapse. But perhaps the Amazon offers a different model, one in which disappearance is not failure, but transformation, where silence is not absence but return to a different state of balance, a different way of being, where civilization is not always meant to leave monuments, but living systems that can be reabsorbed when the time is right. There is a phrase some archaeologists now use, the Amazon as a domesticated landscape, not in the sense of being tamed or fenced, but in the sense that humans helped shape its rhythms, its forests, its rivers, its soils, and then at some point step back. The cities didn't crumble, they didn't burn, they dissolved, like sugar in water, leaving sweetness behind. And so, we're left with fragments, raised mounds, dark soil, broken ceramics, satellite traces of roads once trodden. And with these fragments, a choice. We can try to reconstruct the past in our own image, measuring it by pyramids and written records, or we can sit quietly with the idea that there are other kinds of greatness, softer, slower, less visible, greatness that works with the land instead of carving through it. That leaves behind not ruins but fertility, not empire but memory. In the end, the Amazon holds its secrets not out of malice but out of rhythm. It gives them when asked gently, when scanned by light or sifted from soil, when listened to as one would a forest at dusk, where the loudest truths come in whispers, and perhaps that is what remains most remarkable of all. Not that these civilizations disappeared, but that they left behind a landscape still capable of growing, of feeding, of remembering. A landscape that holds its people in layers, like leaves pressed between pages. For most of history, seeing meant being there. To know what lay in the heart of the forest, you had to walk it. You had to sweat through the humidity, push aside branches, listen to the insects humming like distant electricity, and step carefully over roots and rivers and all the things that hid beneath the leaves. The deeper the forest, the more hidden the story. But in recent years, we've learned to see differently, to see without touching, to map without marking, to illuminate without disturbing. One of the most transformative tools in this quiet revolution is a technology called LiDAR, short for light detection and ranging. It works by sending pulses of laser light from an aircraft down toward the Earth's surface. These pulses travel at the speed of a light, bouncing off everything they touch: leaves, branches, buildings, rocks, soil. By measuring how long each pulse takes to return, and how many times it bounces along the way, LiDAR creates an incredibly detailed three-dimensional map of the terrain. Not just the forest canopy, but the ground hidden underneath. The key to LiDAR's magic is density. A single scan might send out hundreds of thousands of pulses per second, and while most reflect off the top layers, the leaves and branches, some reach all the way through to the forest floor. When these pulses are collected and the data is cleaned, archaeologists can digitally strip away the vegetation, revealing the earth beneath as if the forest were never there. What's left is a ghost map, a landscape of mounds, roads, canals and terraces that no human eye has seen in centuries, perhaps even millennia. It was LiDAR that unveiled the true extent of the Kasarabi culture in Bolivia. What had looked like untouched forest from above was, in fact, full of carefully designed urban structures. Raised platforms, reservoirs, ceremonial mounds, star-shaped enclosures. And it wasn't just one or two sites, there were dozens, entire networks of cities, all connected by straight roads, hidden just beneath the foliage. Without LiDAR, these places would still be unknown, their stories still folded into the leaves. But it's not only Bolivia. In Brazil's Acre region, LiDAR revealed hundreds of geoglyphs, large geometric earthworks shaped like circles, squares and spirals, dug into the ground and then forgotten beneath the returning forest. In Guatemala, it exposed the density of ancient Maya cities, showing how their urban planning was far more complex and widespread than once believed. In Cambodia, it has traced the outlines of Angkor's hidden suburbs, invisible beneath jungle for generations. Again and again, LiDAR reveals the same truth. What we assumed was empty was, in fact, full. There is something almost poetic in this. That light, soft, silent, and swift, should be the key to unlocking what brute force could not. That, in a way, the forest has chosen to reveal its stories only to those who would ask gently. LiDAR doesn't dig. It doesn't cut or burn or flatten. It passes over, listening instead of shouting, and gives back a picture shaped by reflection. It has changed not just what we know, but how we know. For centuries, archaeology in the Amazon was limited by the terrain. The idea of finding ancient cities beneath trees that stretch for thousands of kilometers seemed improbable, if not impossible. Excavation required resources, labour, and often the painful trade-off of clearing land. But with LiDAR, entire landscapes can be surveyed in a matter of days. It is not a replacement for excavation, but a kind of compass, a way to decide where to look and where to let be. This technology has also forced a rethinking of scale, where once we believed the Amazon could not support large dense populations, we now see that it did, just not in the ways we expected. Without stone monuments or long-lasting walls, these societies built with earth, with forest, and with knowledge of the land's rhythms. They made their homes in forms that the eye alone couldn't easily detect. But light could, and perhaps this is part of the shift happening in how we understand ancient history. We are moving away from the idea that greatness must always be visible, that civilization is measured by what survives above the ground. LiDAR helps us see the value in what lies beneath, not only physically, but metaphorically. The invisible labour, the quiet designs, the wisdom of subtlety. There's a gentle irony too in the fact that modern science needed to rise above the forest to finally see what was on the ground, that the aircrafts flying miles above the canopy are now helping us reconnect with the lives once lived beneath it. It's as if we had to step back far enough, zoom out wide enough, to understand how closely these people lived with their world. But LiDAR is only one tool. It cannot date artifacts, interpret symbols, or uncover stories without context. What it offers is the outline, the suggestion, the whisper of a city beneath the trees, and then it is up to archaeologists, historians, ecologists, and indigenous communities to listen, to interpret, to fill in the silence with care and respect. In this way, LiDAR is not just a tool of detection, it's a tool of invitation. It invites us to think differently about what a landscape can hold. It invites us to question assumptions, to return to places we thought we knew, and to look again, with better eyes and better questions. And as more regions of the Amazon are scanned, we will almost certainly discover more. Not just more cities, but more evidence of how people and forest lived in harmony, how knowledge was encoded in roads and soil and water, and how history can remain hidden for centuries, not because it was forgotten, but because we didn't yet know how to see it. Some stories are written in ink, others are carved in stone. But in the Amazon, where rains wash paper away and buildings rarely outlast the trees that surround them, the stories linger in layers, settled gently year by year into the riverbanks and lake beds. These layers don't shout, they don't sparkle, but they hold a kind of memory deeper than books, more patient than monuments, and to read them you don't look across the horizon, you look down into the earth itself. At first glance, sediment might not seem like much, just soft, brown layers of silt and sand laid down by water and time. But to a trained eye, and with the right tools, a single column of sediment can become a timeline stretching back thousands of years. Every flood leaves behind a signature. Every fire deposits a whisper of charcoal. Every growing season releases pollen, tiny and weightless, that settles slowly through the water to rest among the other grains. Layer after layer, year after year, the forest records its own history, not in sentences, but in strata. Scientists gather these stories using long, hollow tubes, pushed carefully into the ground at the bottom of lakes or along riverbanks. When the tubes are pulled up, they contain a core, a slender cylinder of earth, its layers undisturbed, its chronology intact. The deeper the layer, the older the moment, and within each thin band lies information, chemical traces, microscopic life, burnt particles, seeds, spores, and fragments of bone or pottery, each one a fragment of a moment long gone. From these quiet columns, researchers can reconstruct a surprisingly vivid picture of the past. They can tell when a region burned frequently, perhaps the result of human-controlled fire. They can see when people were planting crops, when they were clearing forest, and even when they disappeared. The pollen of certain plants, like manioc, maize, or sweet potato, signals cultivation. A sudden drop in their presence may hint at migration, collapse, or environmental change. Charcoal layers, especially when found in high concentrations, suggest the controlled use of fire, not only for clearing land but possibly for soil enrichment, an early form of landscape management. These layers align with the evidence of terra preta, further confirming that Amazonian societies were actively engineering their environment, not simply moving through it. Fire was a tool, not just a threat. Some sediment cores contain tiny ceramic fragments, too small to see at a glance but revealed under a microscope. Shards of cooking pots or storage vessels, long since broken and washed away by time. Their presence tells us that people were not only passing through these places but living there, cooking, working, discarding, returning. Chemical signatures also speak volumes. Elevated levels of phosphorus and calcium suggest sustained agriculture. Traces of fecal sterols, molecules that form as part of digestion, can indicate where human or animal communities concentrated. Even heavy metals, sometimes absorbed through natural clays or pigments, can reveal patterns of tool use, trade, or ornamentation. What's remarkable is that none of this requires turning the forest upside down. No bulldozers, no open pits. A single core, carefully extracted, can hold centuries of memory, compressed into a few feet of earth. It's a kind of archaeology of gentleness, where the past is read like the rings of a tree, quiet, concentric, each one a soft echo of seasons long past. And yet, reading sediment is not only about facts, it's about rhythms. It allows us to feel the pulses of change, not just what happened, but when and how quickly. In some places, sediment records a long continuity, suggesting stable habitation over hundreds of years. In others, there are abrupt shifts, fires that come suddenly, followed by silence, crops that flourish, then vanish, patterns that hint at human presence, and then the eerie flatness that suggests absence. One such case lies in the lake cores taken from regions near known archaeological sites. In some, a high diversity of pollen combined with charcoal and increased nutrient levels suggests intensive human land use between 1000 and 1400 AD. But then the signal fades. Fewer cultivated plants, less charcoal, a return to forest pollen, dominated by towering trees rather than edible crops. The lake returns to quiet, but the silence is not empty. It's full of the suggestion that people were once there, living complex lives, shaping the land before something changed. These stories, pieced together with care and patience, remind us that the Earth itself is a kind of book, a slow one, without paragraphs or punctuation, but layered with meaning. And it is in these layers that the past is held not in monuments, but in moisture and minerals, in the microscopic dance of spores and soot. But perhaps what's most moving is the sense of humility this work inspires. The forest does not offer its stories easily. The ground does not give up its secrets without trust. And even when we learn to read its language, the grains, the chemical markers, the fossilized pollen, we're still only hearing part of the tale. The rest, as always, lives in silence, in the rhythm of rains, in the breath of roots pushing deeper. And yet, from that silence, something beautiful emerges. A picture not of a forgotten world, but a remembering one. One that never truly left, but simply settled into itself, waiting to be asked, gently, what it remembers. By now, you might imagine that with LIDAR, scans sweeping through the canopy and sediment cores whispering their secrets from below, we must know most of what there is to know about the Amazon's past. But that, perhaps, is the most humbling truth of all. We've only just begun to ask the right questions. For every mound we've mapped, for every road we've traced beneath the vines, there are hundreds, maybe thousands more still hidden, still waiting. The Amazon covers over 6 million square kilometres, stretching across 9 countries, embracing more than 1/3 of the planet's remaining tropical forest. It is a place of incomprehensible scale, its interior so vast that even today, parts of it have never been visited by scientists, never photographed from the ground, never walked with intent. LIDAR, for all its power, is still expensive and limited in reach. Most of the rainforest remains unsurveyed, its shapes and silences still wrapped in green. Even in areas where discoveries have been made, where roads and geoglyphs and dark earth have told part of their story, so much remains unknown. We don't yet know how many languages were spoken here before colonization. We don't know how many distinct cultures left behind unmarked cities, or how they related to one another. We don't know how many kinds of knowledge about plants, soils, seasons, stars, have been lost because no one wrote them down, or because the people who carried them were never asked to share. And beyond the archaeology, there is the living forest itself, still revealing new species of insects, birds, fungi and frogs each year. In some parts of the western Amazon, researchers routinely discover dozens of new species in a single expedition. Not mythical monsters, but quiet creatures, the small, the hidden, the perfectly adapted. Life that has evolved in concert with rain and leaf and shadow, entirely unknown to us until someone looks closely enough to notice. But this noticing takes time, and more than time, it takes access, safety, and patience. Parts of the Amazon are difficult to reach not just because of geography, but because of politics. Deforestation, land disputes, and illegal mining operations threaten both the land and the people who protect it. Many regions are unsafe for researchers to enter. Others are under the stewardship of indigenous communities who rightly ask for respect, consultation, and consent before anyone comes in with tools and questions. There's also the question of conservation ethics. To what extent should we seek to uncover what the forest has so carefully covered? If a site has been reclaimed by trees, is it always best to pull those trees back again? Or is there value in leaving some mysteries intact, allowing them to remain undisturbed, acknowledged but not opened? For every answer we chase, we must ask, what is the cost of knowing? And yet, even as we tread carefully, the forest continues to offer glimpses, a strangely symmetrical rise in the soil, a line of trees growing in an oddly straight row, a patch of unusually dark earth beneath the roots of cassava plants, each one a possible fragment of a much larger story. Sometimes the discovery begins not with a scan or a satellite image, but with a question from someone who's lived there all their life. A farmer pointing to a mound he's never cleared. A a child asking why the forest floor feels hollow beneath a certain patch of grass. It reminds us that not all knowledge comes from technology. Some of it comes from paying attention, from listening to the people who already know these landscapes, who live within them, walk through them, and inherit their rhythms through memory and song. Increasingly, archaeologists and scientists are learning to collaborate with indigenous communities, not as subjects, but as partners. Not as keepers of secrets, but as co-authors of the story the forest still wants to tell. And what a story it is. A story not just of mounds and cities, but of relationships between people and plants, between land and memory, between what has been lost and what might still be found. The Amazon doesn't give up these stories quickly. They come slowly, like a river bending around a fallen tree. But they are there. We know this because we've seen just enough to believe that what remains hidden may be just as vast as what has already been revealed. The forest has depth, not just vertically in its layers of canopy and soil, but historically, in the way time folds through it. Every step forward uncovers something we didn't know to ask. Every core sample leads to more questions. Every LiDAR scan opens not a conclusion, but a beginning. And so, we move forward, not with the urgency of conquest, but with the quiet reverence of readers who have just discovered the first chapter of a long-lost book. We turn the pages slowly. We pause between sentences. We acknowledge the words that have faded, and the ones that were never written. We wonder how the rest of the story might unfold. Perhaps the forest will tell us, or perhaps it will only ever whisper. Either way, it is still listening. It is easy, from the outside, to think of the Amazon as a place that exists without people, a great green ocean, rolling across South America, untouched by human hand except at its fringes. For a long time, that was the story we told, that the forest was pristine, untamed, a wilderness unmarked by the shaping influence of civilization. But as our tools for seeing have grown sharper and our understanding more humble, we've come to realise something quieter and perhaps far more profound. The forest is not untouched. It is remembering. Beneath its canopy, the Amazon holds the traces of those who lived not against it, but with it. Communities who planted, pruned, harvested and shaped this landscape over thousands of years. What might look like chance, randomness, or the will of nature alone is, in many places, the legacy of careful cultivation. This is not a garden in the conventional sense, nor a farm bounded by fences. It is what scientists now call a cultural forest, an ecosystem sculpted over generations by people who understood its rhythms intimately and left behind patterns we're only now beginning to see. One of the clearest signs of this is the presence of useful tree species, those that bear fruits, nuts, medicines or durable wood, found in unusually high concentrations around ancient settlement sites. These aren't coincidences, they are the echoes of deliberate planting, selective management and generational care. Species like the Brazil nut tree, which towers over its neighbours and lives for centuries, are almost never found far from human-inhabited areas. Their presence marks where people once lived, and still live. In fact, some researchers now believe that much of the Amazon's biodiversity owes itself not just to natural evolution, but to human guidance, not dominating or extracting, but encouraging and amplifying what was already thriving. This is not farming in the industrial sense. It's not fields cleared for a single crop, or forests reduced to timber. Instead, what indigenous communities practiced, and still practice today, is a form of agroforestry, where useful species are encouraged within the forest matrix, where the boundaries between cultivated and wild blur, and where productivity is measured not in acres harvested but in balance maintained. It's a kind of choreography, where people move through the forest, nudging it gently, learning from it, and letting it lead. In regions once thought to be too poor in soil for sustained habitation, researchers have found long-lived forest islands of exceptional abundance, often dominated by species like peach palm, bitter manioc, cupuaçu, acai and cacao, all of them central to Amazonian diets and trade networks for millennia. These clusters are not naturally occurring in such density. They are the legacy of intention. Sometimes these patterns are visible in satellite imagery, a ring of fruit trees where an old village once stood, or a line of palms tracing an ancient path. Other times they're more subtle, a certain mix of species, or a grove that seems too orderly for chance. To someone passing through, they might seem like random abundance, but to the communities who live there, they are the result of ancestral planting, of knowledge passed down not through books, but through stories, observation, and embodied memory. This memory is not only botanical, it is cultural. It exists in the stories told about how to harvest a fruit without harming the tree, in the timing of planting certain crops to align with the river's rise or fall, in the songs sung while collecting bark, and in the rituals of sharing what the forest provides. To live in the Amazon, for those who have always lived there, is not to extract from it. It is to be in constant conversation with it. And, while much of this knowledge has been threatened by colonization, by displacement, by the rush to simplify complex systems for profit, it still persists. In indigenous communities throughout the Amazon basin, the forest is not seen as a separate entity, but as kin, as teacher, as archive. Trees are planted not just for food, but for grandchildren. Paths are cleared not for dominance, but for guidance. Fires are used not to destroy, but to renew. From a scientific perspective, these relationships are starting to be recognized as key to ecological resilience. Places managed using traditional agroforestry techniques are often more diverse, more productive, and more resistant to climate fluctuations than surrounding unmanaged lands. The forest, shaped by human hands over thousands of years, is not weaker for it, it is stronger. And so, the idea of a pristine Amazon begins to unravel, not as a loss, but as a revelation. What we find instead is a forest that has been cultivated, nourished, and remembered, not in a way that scars, but in a way that sinks in gently, like footsteps in soft earth. A memory that grows taller each year, bearing fruit not just for the present, but for the past that still lives inside it. To walk through such a place is not just to enter nature, it is to step into a story still being written, line by line, branch by branch, root by root. There are trees in the Amazon that have stood for centuries. You could walk past one and not know its story, its roots sinking deep into the soil, its trunk wide enough to carry rain down like a whisper, its canopy feeding parrots, sloths and insects you've never heard of. But that tree, like so many in this forest, may not be there by chance. It may have been planted or at least encouraged by someone long gone. A person who never imagined satellites or maps or global concern, but who knew how to plant something for others and how to trust that time would do the rest. In this way, the forest is not just a collection of living organisms, it is a kind of inheritance. A memory passed down in wood and fruit and shadow. One of the most profound realizations of recent decades is that some of the trees that seem wild in the Amazon were once deliberately propagated by indigenous communities who understood the forest not only as a source of survival, but as a partner across generations. Take the Brazil nut tree, for instance, a towering ancient species whose seeds are found in markets across the world. These trees do not fruit in isolation. They require a highly specific environment. Certain bees for pollination, particular fungi for root health, and the company of other plants that together form a supportive neighbourhood. And yet, they grow in dense clusters around abandoned village sites, sometimes kilometres from modern human activity. Their presence marks the memory of cultivation, not in rows or orchards, but in more subtle arrangements, where, Humans selected and encouraged what would best serve future needs. Then there is the peach palm, whose thorny trunk yields a starchy, nutrient-rich fruit. Used for food, alcohol, and even animal feed, it has been a dietary staple for thousands of years. These trees are often found in great abundance where archaeological remains suggest long-term habitation. They spread slowly on their own, but flourish where people once collected seeds, discarded pits, and allowed nature to fill in the rest. To the untrained eye, such groves may appear spontaneous, but they are instead a kind of echo, the result of a decision made many generations earlier. Even the cacao tree, source of chocolate, offers clues. Genetic studies have revealed that its greatest diversity exists in the upper Amazon, suggesting a long history of human cultivation and experimentation. The varieties we enjoy today, mild, complex, aromatic, are likely the result of careful selection, carried out not in laboratories, but through tacit communal knowledge shared among indigenous families, passed through practice rather than publication. These trees are not just ecological legacies, they are acts of remembrance. In cultures where oral traditions carry history, and where permanence is not built in stone but in systems of sustenance, planting a tree becomes more than an agricultural task. It becomes a message to the future, a way of saying, we were here, we cared, we thought of you. And what's striking is how this form of inheritance doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't need to be inscribed in monuments or sealed in tombs. It lives quietly, producing fruit for anyone who walks by, sheltering animals, restoring soil, and holding water in its roots. In this sense, it is an open legacy, one that continues to serve even when the name of its planter has long been forgotten. But the forest remembers. This way of thinking about inheritance challenges some of the assumptions we carry about wealth, about legacy, about what it means to leave something behind. In much of the world, inheritance is a private thing, held within families or locked in vaults. But in the Amazon, many trees planted by human hands benefit entire ecosystems, not just descendants by blood. A grove of fruit trees feeds birds, which spread seeds. Shade trees protect undergrowth. Leguminous trees fix nitrogen and enrich the soil. The act of planting becomes civic, even cosmic, a way of keeping life going, far beyond the boundaries of any single lifetime. Scientists studying these patterns now speak of domesticated landscapes, but that word may fall short of the full truth. These were not spaces domesticated like animals in a pen. They were co-inhabited, negotiated with care. The people who tended these trees knew that their time was one chapter in a much longer story, and that their best contributions might be those that flowered after they were gone. Even today, among many indigenous and riverine communities, this ethos remains. Grandparents pass on the knowledge of which trees to plant near water, which ones will grow in thin soil, which need fire to thrive. Children learn to recognize edible leaves before they learn to write. It is not just botany, it is belonging. And for those of us who come later, trying to understand this world from the outside, perhaps the best we can do is listen, to step lightly, to realize that the ground beneath our feet may have once been a garden, that the fruit overhead is not simply wild, but gifted, and that the forest, in its quiet abundance, is still offering that gift, to bats, to birds, to us. When we speak of ancient knowledge, we often think of scrolls, stone inscriptions, or dusty libraries. But in the Amazon, the library has leaves, the shelves bear fruit, the pages hum with bees, and the wisdom is not static. It ripens, it falls, it seeds the ground again. To walk through such a place is not just to observe nature. It is to walk through a living archive, where inheritance grows on branches and knowledge blooms in cycles. And if you pause long enough, you may realize you're not just looking at trees, you're looking at the intentions of people who lived long ago, who shaped the world not for conquest, but for continuity, and in their quiet way, they are still speaking. To speak of the Amazon without speaking of the river is like trying to understand breath without air. The forest may be its heart, pulsing with life, but the river is its breath, expanding, contracting, carrying and renewing. It is not a line drawn across a map. It is a rhythm, a presence. A cycle so vast that it shapes not just the geography of a continent, but the very way time flows for those who live within its reach. The Amazon River does not behave like most rivers. It does not politely keep to its banks or follow a single path. It rises and falls with the seasons, sometimes doubling or tripling in width. During the rainy months, the waters swell so dramatically that entire sections of forest become submerged for weeks, even months. Trees stand ankle deep, knee deep, chest deep in brown, slow-moving water. Fish swim between trunks. Dolphins glide where children once played. The land breathes water and then exhales it again. This rhythm is called the flood pulse, and it is one of the most important ecological processes on Earth. It is not merely a seasonal nuisance, it is the engine of abundance. As the river expands, it deposits nutrient-rich sediment across vast flood plains, recharging the soil, replenishing the roots, and allowing for the germination of species that have evolved to depend on these wet intervals. When the waters recede, they leave behind new ground and 1,000 quiet opportunities for growth. People have adapted to this pattern for thousands of years. Homes are built on stilts or rafts, gardens are planted on higher ground, or timed to emerge just as the water pulls back. Canoes become essential tools of transport, not for adventure, but for daily life. A trip to visit a neighbour, to fish, to check on a patch of cassava, all of it shaped by the water's mood. In this way, the river does not merely flow through the Amazon, it teaches. It teaches patience. Above all, you do not rush the flood. You do not fight its rise. You learn to move with it, to time your life by its long inhale and exhale. This lesson has become embedded in the practices of countless indigenous and riverine communities who understand that the river does not destroy, it renews. What appears as disappearance is often just a turning of the cycle. Water comes and then goes, and in its wake, things are not the same, but they are not worse. They are ready. This rhythm is mirrored in the migrations of animals. Birds follow the changing water lines, nesting in the dry months, fishing in the wet. Fish travel inland to spawn in temporary lakes formed by the rising flood. Even insects shift their patterns with the seasons, appearing in great clouds and then vanishing, as if tied to an unseen calendar. And always, humans have moved in step with these cycles, their festivals and food stores, their fishing techniques and planting rituals, all aligned with the river's memory of when to give and when to rest. What's remarkable is that this cyclical way of being is not framed by urgency or conquest. It carries a kind of graceful surrender, not to chaos but to repetition. A trust that what goes will return, that what floods will recede, that what is submerged is not lost, merely resting. It is a philosophy written not in texts but in mud and driftwood and seed. And yet, even within this great cycle, there is change. The Amazon, for all its timelessness, is not static. Climate patterns shift. Waters rise too early or fall too late. Deforestation upstream changes the river's flow, altering currents, temperatures, sediment loads. These disruptions ripple outward, touching every creature, every village, every tree that leans just slightly in one direction because that's where the wind usually comes from. Still, the memory remains, not just in the land, but in the people who know how to read it. A change in the colour of water might signal a coming flood. A particular bird's call might tell of shifting seasons. Knowledge like this is not invented, it is inherited, felt, refined over generations. It is cyclical, just like the river itself. And perhaps this is the final lesson of the Amazon, not as a place of secrets or marvels, but as a reminder of return. that nothing here moves in straight lines, that what we see as progress, the forest may see as pulse, that we are not separate from these rhythms no matter how far we drift. We too are made of cycles. We breathe in, we breathe out, we sleep and wake, rise and fall, plant and harvest, remember and forget and remember again. To look at the river is to be reminded that stillness is an illusion, that everything flows, even when it looks like nothing is moving. That time in the Amazon is not a ruler, it is a loop. And to live well in such a place is not to impose, but to join in. There is a kind of peace in that, a release of urgency, a sense that we do not have to control every turn, but only understand the pattern and find our place within it. Because the river remembers, the forest remembers, and if we listen closely enough, perhaps we will too. Close your eyes for a moment, just for a breath, and imagine the forest not as trees or birds or vines, not even as a place, but as something larger and slower, something that breathes, not like we do, with lungs and ribs and sharp intakes of air, but with a breath so broad and patient it takes a full year to complete. A breath that stretches across seasons and centuries. Inhale with the rain, exhale with the drought. A breath that rises in the green flush of new leaves and sighs out in the drift of old ones onto the soil. The forest pulses, not in the sudden, visible way of a heartbeat, but in the deeper rhythm of water rising and falling, of light shifting through the canopy, of life unfolding in slow loops. This pulse is not loud, but it is everywhere. You feel it in the morning fog that clings to the bark. You hear it in the way the frogs begin to call when the air grows heavy with rain. You see it in the patterns of flowering trees that bloom not all at once, but in careful succession, each taking their turn in the symphony of growth. Scientists have begun to understand that trees speak, not in words, but in scent and chemistry and subtle movement. Through underground fungal networks, threads finer than a hair, they share water and nutrients, warning each other of insect threats or drought. A tree nibbled by a caterpillar may send out volatile signals into the air, prompting its neighbours to prepare their defences. Others respond to touch, to temperature, to the faintest changes in light. What appears silent is not silent. It is simply slow. There is a kind of intelligence in this rhythm, but it's not the kind we rush to measure. It does not produce data at the pace of machines or solve problems with urgency. Instead, it remembers, it adapts, it waits. This is not slowness out of delay. It is slowness as wisdom, as patience, as a way of being in which nothing is wasted and everything has its place in the long unfolding of life. If you lie down on the forest floor and let your ears fill with the near silence, you begin to sense it. Not just the sound of a leaf falling, or the echo of distant water, but something underneath it all. A hum, too low to hear, but too steady to ignore. The hum of life continuing, unbothered by your presence, unchanged by your questions. The hum of the forest being itself. And that in its own way is a kind of comfort, because it means you don't have to keep up. You don't have to know everything. The forest doesn't ask you to solve it. It doesn't demand to be understood in full. It only asks that you be still long enough to notice that you are already part of its breath, already woven into its pattern, already held in its rhythm. The roots beneath you do not care about your deadlines. The trees overhead do not measure time in minutes. They remember rains that fell before your ancestors were born, and they will still be here when your great-grandchildren whisper stories into their own soil. Time here does not tick forward. It spirals, loops, sways, and in that rhythm, everything finds its way back, even we. And perhaps that is why so many people, even those who have never walked beneath the Amazon's vast ceiling of green, feel something stir in them when they see it from afar, a kind of recognition, as if somewhere deep in the memory of the body we know this rhythm. We remember what it means to live in step with a place, to grow slowly, to change without needing to be chased, to be part of a pulse that does not end when we sleep, or when we go home, or when we forget it for a while. Because the forest does not forget. It keeps its own calendar, marks its own seasons, and within those seasons it holds more stories than we will ever count, not in books, not in archives, but in the texture of bark, in the smell of wet leaves, in the loam pressed beneath your thumb, and in the spaces between, the gaps in the canopy where light falls like water, the spaces in the soil where roots twist together like fingers at rest. You don't need to name it, you don't need to capture it, just notice, just listen, just breathe. Because right now, wherever you are, whether you're lying in bed or curled into a chair, whether you're far from forests or held within one, there is still a kind of pulse inside you, a slow rhythm that matches the trees more than the clocks, the rhythm of being alive in a body, of sleeping, waking, changing, remembering. And when you notice that rhythm, when you sink into it gently, the noise of the outside world softens, the pressure to rush begins to lift, and you can finally hear what the forest has been whispering all along. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to rest. The world still turns. The leaves still fall, and you too are part of the breath. There's something deeply ancient in the idea of sleeping near trees. Long before we built walls to shut out the dark or rooftops to guard us from rain, we slept beneath branches. Our earliest nights were spent under leaves, beside fires, with the scent of bark and moss in our breath. Sleep, for most of our species' history, didn't come boxed inside buildings. It came curled next to trunks, swaying with the wind, timed to the rhythm of cicadas and birds and the rustle of night creatures moving softly in the undergrowth. Even now, far removed from that daily intimacy, many people still feel something shift when they lie in a forest. There's a hush that settles over the mind. Not silence exactly, but a stillness woven from sound, the slow drip of water from leaf to leaf, the distant flutter of wings, the almost imperceptible creak of a tree leaning ever so slightly with the wind. It is not the absence of noise, but the presence of an older kind of quiet. A quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. A quiet that simply lets you be. Imagine for a moment, lying on your back in a clearing, the forest breathing all around you. The air is damp and warm, filled with the subtle green of crushed leaves and soil. Above you, branches weave across the sky, and the stars peek between them like shy, blinking eyes. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls once, then disappears into silence again. You're not cold, you're not afraid. You're being held, not by a person, but by place. The earth is soft beneath your body, not in the way of cushions or mattresses, but in the way of something that has cradled life for a very long time. Roots push gently under your shoulder blades, reminding you of the network below. They do not press to disturb you, only to whisper that you are not alone, that even below the surface the forest is listening. You inhale and the air feels alive, not in the way city air moves, sharp and dry and impatient, but slowly, as if it too has just stirred from slumber. Each breath is tinged with the sweet decay of fallen things returning to the soil, with the perfume of blooming night orchids, with the almost dreamlike scent of wet bark. It feels like breathing through memory, as if every particle of air has touched leaves and streams, and the inside of flowers before it reached you. This is not the kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion or habit. This is deep rest, the kind that sinks beneath the skin, settles in the chest, and coils softly around the bones, the kind that does not ask you to try. It arrives like dusk through the trees, gradually, warmly, gently, and all around you, the forest sleeps too. Not every part, of course. Some insects hum, some frogs sing, but even in their movement there is no urgency. There's no need to finish anything before dawn. Everything that needed to be done has been done. The rest can wait. Even the moon seems slower here, rising not with fanfare, but with the careful silence of someone entering a room already full of dreams. As you rest, you might begin to feel yourself blending into the forest, not metaphorically, but almost physically. Your breath matches the sigh of the leaves. Your thoughts slow to the pace of a creeping vine. You're no longer a visitor, not entirely. You're something placed here for safekeeping, something the forest has tucked in for the night. And isn't that what sleep is at its best? Not escape, but return. A return to the part of you that doesn't need alarms or tasks or even words. A return to the self that knows how to drift, how to loosen the knots of the day and slip into something wider, something older. The forest knows this. It has seen millions of nights. It has rocked birds to sleep on thin branches, curled vines around resting sloths, blanketed the ground in fallen petals as gently as a mother tucks in her child. It has no need to rush through night to reach morning. It simply allows the dark to do its work. And so, as your eyelids grow heavy and your breath slows, know this. You are safe here. You are welcome. You are part of a lineage of sleepers who have closed their eyes under these stars, who have trusted the world to keep turning while they rested. You don't need to solve anything now. You don't need to think about tomorrow. The forest will hold it for you. Let the weight of your body melt into the earth. Let your thoughts dissolve like mist. Let yourself be carried by leaf, by wind, by time. And if you dream tonight, let it be of trees, of canopies stretched above rivers, of roots whispering below the soil, of a world that remembers how to sleep without fear. If the forest is a keeper of breath, then the river is a keeper of time, not in the way clocks divide hours or calendars measure months, but in a more fluid memory, a continuity that remembers without effort. Water does not cling to what it carries, yet it holds the imprint of everything it's ever touched. Minerals from mountains, the ash of ancient fires, the pollen of lost forests, the drifting seeds of trees planted long ago. These things move downstream without ceremony, folded into the current, dissolved into the great forgetting that is also a kind of remembering. And so the river goes on, always forward, always returning. At night, when the light bends and the surface smooths, the river reflects more than trees. It reflects memory. You might not see it, not in the ripple or the shimmer, but it is there, beneath the visible, a soft swirl of what once was, a rhythm of footsteps now washed away, a song hummed by someone you'll never meet, once while fishing, a name carved into a paddle long since lost. The Amazon River does not resist these things. It carries them, gently, endlessly. It does not judge what is precious and what is not. A gold nugget, a bone, a broken comb, a thought someone almost said aloud, all of them float for a moment, then vanish into motion. If you were to sit beside this river in the final hours before sleep and let your thoughts drift, truly drift, you might begin to imagine what it remembers. Not just facts or moments, but feelings. The hushed awe of a person seeing it for the first time, the weight of silence after a loss, the echo of laughter that once danced between the banks like birdsong, because water listens, even when no one speaks to it, even when we forget it's there. It flows past villages, bends around cities, seeps under roots, and never forgets how to return to the sea. Even its path has memory. Tributaries that used to run strong, then faded. Banks that shifted. Islands that appeared only during the drier seasons. The river is not simply shaped by the land. It reshapes the land quietly year by year, carrying the edges of one world to the heart of another. And as it does, it teaches us something about time that no watch or calendar ever could. That time doesn't march forward in a straight line. It loops, it eddies, It floods and recedes. It moves through us like the river moves through its forest, not in haste, but in presence. Sometimes rushing, sometimes still, but always moving. You might wonder then if the river remembers you, not because of anything you did, or said, or left behind, but simply because you were there, because your breath once mingled with its mist, because your thoughts, drifting in the dark, once touched its surface and dissolved like moonlight. And maybe it does. Maybe it carries the trace of your presence in a single droplet, now winding its way around a tree root, or glinting in the eye of a fish, or settling for a moment on the tongue of a leaf before falling again. Maybe the river's memory is not about holding on, but about carrying forward, gently, endlessly, without asking for anything in return. That perhaps is the softest truth the Amazon offers in these final moments of wakefulness, that nothing is truly lost. Not when it's been carried with care, not when it's been folded into the rhythm of something larger than ourselves. As you lie here, wherever here is for you, let the river carry your thoughts the same way it carries the stories of the forest. Let them drift, let them soften, let them lose their edges and find their way into deeper water, where urgency dissolves and only motion remains. There's no need to organise them, no need to chase them. They will move as they need to. Some will settle in the silt of memory. Others will continue on, unseen, maybe resurfacing in a dream, maybe never again. That's the gift of the river. It doesn't require closure. It only offers passage. And so we return to that quiet truth again, that the river is not here to be conquered, or solved, or explained in full. It is here to be listened to be followed, to be trusted. It has seen much. It has forgotten nothing, and still it flows. Let it carry you now, not as a current sweeps away a leaf, but as time carries a memory, gently tucked into the folds of evening. Let your body grow heavy. Let your mind lighten. Let your breath come slower, quieter, until you feel it matching the river's pulse. Not quite sleep, not quite thought, just being. And when sleep finally comes, it will not be a break, but a continuation of drift, of story, of being carried through darkness not alone, but cradled in the current of something ancient, wide and knowing. The river remembers, and tonight it remembers you too. Let's imagine now that you're no longer watching the river. You're part of it, not standing beside it, not sitting near its edge, but resting gently inside it, your body weightless, cradled by the warm current as it moves slowly, steadily forward. There is no fear here, no panic, no urgency. The water does not pull you harshly or demand anything from you. It simply carries. It holds. It hums in a tone so low and soft that you feel it more than you hear it, like a lullaby written in gravity and flow. You're not sinking. You're not floating away. You're simply drifting, slow as a leaf, smooth as silk, your thoughts moving at the same pace as the current. No faster, no slower. You don't need to decide where you're going. The river already knows. All it asks of you now is to let go. Let go of today. Let go of the noises still echoing faintly in the corners of your mind. Let go of the lists, the tasks, the what-ifs and maybes. Let them trail behind you like small leaves you no longer need to carry. Let them dissolve into the water, become part of its wide, ageless flow. There is nothing urgent now. Not here, not tonight. Only movement, only quiet. In this gentle river, time does not press forward. It spreads. Moments drift past you like petals released from unseen trees, soft, unmeasured, without beginning or end. The rush of the day fades into something calmer, something more diffuse, and soon even the word day feels too sharp, too heavy. What you're in now is not time, but something older, something slower, a rhythm shaped by wind and water and sleep. The sky above is darkening, but not with finality. It fades like ink in water, folding in on itself with softness. Stars blink overhead, but they don't seem to be in a rush to glow. Even light seems to take its time here, drifting across the surface in long, quiet ripples. The air smells faintly of rain that hasn't yet come, clean, earthy, patient. There are no thoughts that need answers now, only the ones that come and go like shadows. A flicker of memory, a soft wondering, a face you loved once, the sound of someone's laughter, half forgotten but still warm. These thoughts do not need to be held tightly. Let them flow past. Let them bob and turn in the current beside you. Acknowledge them, then release them. They will not vanish. They will simply go where they need to go. You're not alone in this river. You're joined by all the things the forest has ever allowed to rest. Fallen branches, drifting pollen, the bones of fish, the scent of leaves, and the silence of turtles sleeping under the surface. Even dreams have passed this way before. Others' dreams, centuries old, carried like pollen on the wind, brushed into the river by soft hands. Tonight, you add your own. And you don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to shape it. You only need to drift. Your body begins to feel heavier now, though not unpleasantly so. It's the kind of heaviness that comes when the mind has finally exhaled, when the muscles loosen not from effort, but from permission. You're being allowed to stop, not because you earned it, but because rest is natural. Because everything in the forest rests, and so should you. Your arms relax, your shoulders sink, your breath finds its own pace, soft and steady, like ripples in the water. Even the quiet inside your chest begins to widen, as though making room for something ancient and kind. And as you drift, the edges of yourself begin to blur, not in a frightening way, but in a way that feels like returning. As if all this time you had been trying to stay sharp, stay focused, stay defined. And now, finally, you're allowed to soften, to become less a someone and more a part of something. Something wider, something slower, something that remembers how to rest without guilt, how to pause without panic. You're not leaving anything behind. You're not falling. You're not failing to hold on. You're doing exactly what the river does, what the trees do, what the wind does, what the night has always done. You're drifting, and drifting is enough. If sleep comes now, and it may, it will not come as a switch or a fall. It will come like a current that slowly, slowly changes course. One moment you are still aware, the next you are not. But even then, the river will carry you. Even then, the forest will remember you are here. So breathe once more and drift. And now, everything grows still. The river has slowed, your breath has settled, and the trees, tall, ancient and silent, have gathered in around you like quiet sentinels at the edge of sleep. Nothing moves in haste, nothing calls for attention. The forest has dimmed the lights of the day, and now waits, not impatiently, not expectantly, but in that gentle, eternal stillness that belongs only to places that know the deep rhythm of time. You may think that this is the end of the journey, but the forest would smile if it could at the idea of something ever truly ending. The forest doesn't believe in endings. It believes in pauses, in returns, in quiet spaces between chapters. It knows that night is not the opposite of day, but its soft continuation. That sleep is not departure, but an unfolding, a passage into a quieter part of the same story. And so it waits. Not because it needs something from you, not because it is testing you, but because it remembers. It remembers the footprints you left in the dust by the water's edge. It remembers the warmth of your breath as you listened. It remembers that, for a short while, you were here, not just passing through, but being with, being part of it. The leaves overhead move just slightly, not from wind, but from the slow exhale of a forest at rest. It is not a breeze, not quite. It is more like the hush of someone turning over in their sleep. The scent of moss, of bark, of earth that has been fed by centuries of rain and sunlight and patience surrounds you now. It is not strong. It is subtle. The kind of scent you notice only when everything else has gone quiet. And everything has gone quiet. Even the frogs have stopped their singing. Even the insects seem to be humming in a lower key. Their sound's no longer a call to action, but a backdrop. A slow lullaby written by 1,000 wings and legs, performed just for the night. If you listen closely, you might hear something even softer than the wind. A low rustling beneath the soil, not a movement but a settling. Roots adjusting in the dark. Fungi breathing in carbon and exhaling wisdom. The kind of sound that only exists when no one is listening. Until now. There is something deeply comforting in knowing that the forest does not disappear when we close our eyes. It does not blink out of existence. It stays. It continues to grow, to breathe, to cradle the ground beneath us. It does not need witnesses. It does not need applause. Its purpose is not to perform but to be. And that is the invitation it leaves with you now. Not to stay awake and study, not to rise and explore, but to rest, to be, to join the stillness, not as an outsider looking in, but as part of the silence itself. Let your thoughts thin out like mist at dawn. Let your breath become so quiet that even the ferns beside you cannot hear it. Let your presence dissolve into the soil, into the trees, into the pulse of a forest that has waited for you, not just tonight, but always. Because perhaps, in some gentle way, it has always known you would return. Perhaps your dreams tonight will carry you back here, not as a traveller, but as a tree, as a single leaf, as a drop of dew balanced on a blade of grass, catching the first light of a morning not yet born. Or perhaps you will not dream at all. Perhaps you will simply sleep, held in the arms of a place that needs no name, no proof, no promise. And when morning does arrive, whether in hours or in years, the forest will still be here. The roots will still be holding the ground. The river will still be carrying its memories. The leaves will still be writing new stories in the language of light and wind and rain. You may forget for a while the feel of moss beneath your hands. You may lose the rhythm of the frog song or the scent of dark, damp soil. But the forest will not forget you. It has folded you into its memory now, not as a visitor, but as part of the quiet, and that is enough. Sleep well, dear traveller, sleep long. The forest is still breathing, and it waits for you, always.